Okay, this was the last piece that we learned in Unit 3, and it was writing inequalities given a graph. Now remember, we can write equations if we have a graph on the line. We would just pick 2 points. We could put those in the calculator and use stat edit to do linear regression, and it would give us the equation of a line. But the calculator will not give you your inequality when you have a graphed inequality. So we did this by hand. So you have this piece of paper here that's flat. We just folded it in half, and we just taped a couple of pieces of tape on the back, taped it in our journal like this. So I want to work a couple of examples for you, how to write an inequality if you're given a graph. So these are the pieces that we're going to need. We're going to need to know our y-intercept. We're going to need to know our slope. We're going to have to figure out our symbol, and then we can write our inequality. So look at your graph. The first thing you do is identify where is it crossing the y-intercept, and where is it crossing the y-axis. So this line here, as you can see, is crossing at this point right here. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, -5, because we started at the origin, we went down. So the y-intercept is -5, or we can always write that as a point too, right? 0, -5. Okay, and then we need to figure out our slope. So here's a point. We need a second really good point. I need to make sure it's, crossing right where these grid lines are crossing. You want the line to be crossing right over where your grid lines meet, and that's a really good point. So the only one I see on this line is that one right there. So to do our slope, we're going to rise and run. So we're going to rise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to run 1, 2. So remember, your slope is rise over run. So that equals 5 over 2. Then after I figure out my rise and my run, I always go back and say, is this a positive or negative slope? This is positive, right? So we don't need to make it a negative. This is definitely a line that's increasing from left to right, so that's positive slope. So now we need to figure out our symbol. Well, the first thing I notice is that this is a broken line. So I know it's either going to be greater than or less than. It's not going to be greater than or equal to or less than or equal to because it's a broken line. So if you look back at your notes when we were graphing inequalities, you need to remember that if it's shaded below the line, it's less than. Shaded above the line, it's greater than. And so sometimes if the slope is really steep, it is hard to tell if it's shaded above or below. So a good place to look is the y-intercept and say, is this graph shaded above the y-intercept or below it? And it's definitely shaded below it. So it's going to be less than. We already talked about how it's not going to have the line under the symbol. It's not equal to because we have a broken line. So our inequality, we're going to write these in the form y equals mx plus b. But instead of the equal sign, we're going to be substituting an inequality symbol because we're still going to write them in what we call slope-intercept form. So we're finding those pieces. We're finding the slope and the y-intercept. And then our symbol that's going to go in place of the equal sign, and then we can write our inequality. So we have y, there's our symbol, less than. Now we need our slope, which we said is 5/2. Then x is part of the formula. And then we need to add our y-intercept. So we could put plus -5, or we could simplify that as y is less than 5/2 x, and plus a negative is just -5. So there is that inequality written that models this graph. So then let's look at this one on the very bottom of the page. So let's find our y-intercept again. Here's our origin. Here's the y-axis. So we go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So our y-intercept is going to be 4, or that's the b value, right? And slope, our m, well, we need to find another good point. I think this is a good one right here. We could also use this point right here, which is that's the x-axis, so that must be the x-intercept. So let's rise and run just to the nearest points. Let's do this one and this point. So from this point, we would go down 1, 2. We would go over 1. Now, right off the bat, if you noticed, we didn't rise up. We had to go down to go to our next point. Well, that should be a clue that this is negative. So like I say, after I figure out my rise and run, I like to go back and look at the line and say, yep, this line is decreasing from left to right, so it is a negative slope. So my slope must be negative 2 over 1 or negative 2. So now my symbol. So again, I'm going to look at the y-intercept and say, is it shaded below or above the y-intercept? Well, it's definitely shaded below, so that symbol again is less than. And then I look at my line, is it solid or dashed? It's a solid line, so it is equal to, so I do need a line under my inequality symbol, which means that the points that are on this line are a part of the solution set. Any point in the shaded area and points on the line are part of the solution set for this inequality. So let's write this linear inequality. I have y. Remember, I'm writing it in this form. I'm going to substitute in for the equal sign, the slope, and the y-intercept. So here's my symbol, less than or equal to. My slope, I've discovered, was negative 2. X is part of the formula. And then my y-intercept is b, 4. So that's plus 4. So there is the linear inequality for this graph right here. And then one more that was helpful to look at is this one right here. So I opened it up and I'm on the left-hand side, the very last example on the bottom. So here's the origin. Let's find our first piece. So remember, we're writing it in this form, Slope-Intercept Form. So I need my symbol to replace my equal sign. I need my slope, and I need my y-intercept. So y-intercept, the b value, slope, and then my symbol. Okay, so at the origin, I have to go down 1, 2. And so my y-intercept must be negative 2. My slope, well, I need to find that second good point on the line, and I see one right here. That looks like a really good point. So let's rise 1. And we have to run 1, 2. And then I look at my line, is it positive or negative slope? It's definitely increasing from left to right, so that's positive slope. My symbol, okay, well, I'm looking at my y-intercept. Is this graph shaded above or below the y-intercept on that line? It's definitely shaded above that line, right? So this is going to be a greater than. And then I look at my line, solid or dashed. It's a dashed, broken line, so it's not equal to. So these points on this broken line are not included in the solution set for this linear inequality. All of the points in the shaded area are, but the ones on the line are not included. And so now let's write our linear inequality. I have y, I need my symbol, greater than. My slope is next, that's 1/2. X is part of the formula. I need my y-intercept, which is negative 2. So there's a few examples to get you started, and then hopefully you can do the other ones on your own. If you have any trouble, let me know. I'll be glad to help you out.